23 years old, a warm April. A phone call late in the evening, and she walks out of the house. A few hours later, she is brought into a clinic unconscious with severe head trauma. The story given to the police is simple. Found by the side of the road, just an accident. That lie is invented by her own older sister. While the younger one fights for her life in intensive care, the older one helps her boyfriend build an alibi. The Fay Blaha case in Nea Makri, just outside Athens, kept the courts, the press, and the public on edge for 12 years. And in 2025, it ended in a way no one wanted, not the mother, not the law. What has to happen inside a family for one blood relative to take the side of the person who caused harm to another? Let's go through it in order. On April 5th, 2013, around 10 in the evening, 23-year-old Fay Blaha walks out of her house. Her mother would later say that her daughter left right after a short phone call. She didn't catch the caller's name, but Fay was in a good mood. A few hours later, a young woman is brought into a private clinic in Athens, unconscious, with severe head trauma. Her chart reads that she was hurt in a random incident by the road. That version is delivered by two people, her boyfriend and her own older sister. Their stories match word for word. No one else knows the truth of that night, except the two of them. Fay will spend 25 days in intensive care. She will never regain consciousness. Her mother stays at her bedside every single day, convinced that some terrible string of coincidences is to blame. Her other daughter, Mary Elena, is right there beside her. The same Mary Elena who helped invent the story about an accidental fall. The same Mary Elena who gave the police statements that had nothing to do with reality. While the younger sister fights for her life, the older one already knows exactly what happened that night. The case shook Greece so deeply that it is still studied in the country's law schools. Today it is the story of a love triangle in which one sister covered for the man responsible for the other's death, and of a lie that held together far longer than it should have. To understand what happened that night, you first need to see the place. Nea Makri is a small seaside town northeast of Athens, off to the side of the noisy capital. In summer, it fills with tourists. In winter, it slips back into a quiet rhythm. Everyone here knows everyone else. Fishermen, tavern owners, shopkeepers, baristas at the local cafes. No one expects great tragedies here, and this is where the Blaha family lives. Fay is the younger daughter, 23 years old, light hair, an open face. The people who worked with her at one of the local cafes describe her the same way. Friendly, never spiteful, no heavy ambition. She has no plans to move to Athens and break into show business. She likes her rhythm, her regulars, her familiar little stretch of coastline. After their parents' divorce, the family is left with 3 women, a mother and 2 daughters. The mother carries everything, works, holds the household together, tries to remain an anchor for both girls. The older sister, Maria Elena, is built differently. She stands out more. She has ambitions in modeling, she is seen more often in public places, she shows up at local events. There is an unspoken hierarchy between the sisters. The older one leads, the younger one follows. There is no open conflict, just a habit. Friends remember that Fay rarely argued with her sister and often gave in where she could have pushed back. Into this picture walks a man who changes everything. Vangelis Stefanakis, 25 years old, from the same neighborhood. His reputation in local circles is questionable. He is known as someone you don't want to argue with, someone used to settling things quickly. Acquaintances warn Fay about him directly. Don't get involved. She hears them, but she doesn't listen. She thinks they see someone different from the man she sees. What Fay accepts as her own story is, in reality, not her own at all. 9 months earlier, in the summer of 2012, Stefanakis started a relationship with another woman, her older sister. Mary Elena and Vangelis hide their connection so carefully that neither relatives nor close friends know about it. They pick places where they're unlikely to be seen. They agree on what to tell mutual acquaintances. The relationship exists in secret mode. That autumn, the younger sister enters the frame. Stefanakis grows close to Fay without breaking things off with Maria Elena. By the end of 2012, he is openly introducing Fay as his girlfriend. At family gatherings, he stands beside her. The photos on her phone show the two of them together. To her mother, it looks like an ordinary new couple, and she tries to get used to it, despite the talk about his reputation. Meanwhile, the older sister doesn't step away. Her meetings with Vangelis continue, only now they are not deceiving the public, they are deceiving Fay. The result is a mirrored arrangement, one man, two blood sisters, two parallel storylines under one roof, and all of it inside a small suburb where people are used to knowing everything about each other. According to investigators, Maria Elena begins to pressure Stefanakis during this period. She demands that he leave the younger one. She asks, she sets conditions, she grows jealous. He doesn't leave. It suits him to keep both lines running. Tension grows between him and the older sister. Attachment grows between him and the younger one. And Fay herself keeps living as if she is in a quiet, normal relationship. She has no idea the second line exists. Not yet. A structure like that has to crack eventually. In the spring of 2013, the first real tension surfaces in the Blaha family. One version says it started with a message accidentally seen on a phone. Another points to a conversation between the sisters that Maria Elena herself steered into dangerous territory. The case file is clear on one point. It was the older sister who told Fay that she had a parallel relationship with Stefanakis, whether on impulse or by calculation, wanting to slam the younger one into reality. The effect is exactly what you would expect. For the first time, the sisters have a major fight, with shouting, without the usual quiet compliance from the younger one. Fay feels deceived twice over, by her sister and by her boyfriend. The only person in the next room who doesn't hear it is the mother, because she isn't home. Fay's friends will later say that in those days, she walked around changed, quieter, paler, more withdrawn. After that, Fay goes for an explanation where anyone in her position would go, to Stefanakis. He starts by denying, then his tone shifts to justification. Then he becomes irritated. He is not used to being asked to account for himself. According to witnesses, he loses his temper and shouts more than once in these conversations. In the last days of March and the first days of April, the atmosphere around this trio reaches its breaking point. The older sister's behavior shifts too. In this short stretch of time, Maria Elena speaks more with Stefanakis than with Fay herself. Their phones are tied together by calls and messages that will later turn up in the case file. What exactly they're arranging, no outsider hears. But those very exchanges will later become the basis for a serious charge. On April 5th, 2013, late in the evening, Fay receives a call and walks out of the house. The meeting place is not far from Fay's home, on one of the quiet suburban streets. There are no witnesses. Everything that will later become known is reconstructed from medical reports and from two different versions told by Stefanakis himself. According to him, the conversation began calmly, slid into an argument, and then he lost control. The forensic medical examination paints a different picture. The injuries were inflicted in sequence and with considerable force. The main area of impact is the head. Fay sustains severe traumatic brain injury. At some point, she stops responding. Stefanakis realizes that the person in front of him is no longer a conversation partner, but someone who urgently needs help. And here he makes a decision that every subsequent court will dissect. He does not call an ambulance right away. He does not call any of her relatives. He chooses something else, to drive her to a private clinic himself. The drive takes time. Every minute without help is critical with an injury like this. By the time he brings Fay in, she is in extremely critical condition. At the entrance, he tells the staff that the young woman struck a car bumper. The clinic's on-duty staff jumps into action, but questions come up during the very first examination. The injuries on this young woman don't look like a fall or like being hit by a car. They look like the marks of deliberate external impact. Sometime later, Fay's older sister arrives at the clinic. She gets there quickly and calmly. None of the staff yet realize that her appearance is not the reaction of a close relative, but part of a story two people have already started constructing, and that the lie the police are about to hear will, in large part, be her own work. Fay's injuries are so severe that the clinic is required to report the case to the police immediately. Officers appear in the corridor, and here Stefanakis changes his story again. He drops the bumper version almost at once. There are too many holes in it. In its place, a new one is born. He just happened to be driving by, noticed a young woman by the side of the road, and brought her to the clinic himself. The officers listen and take notes. The older sister confirms the same version. And this is where, according to the case file, her role as an accomplice in the lie becomes clear. Maria Elena doesn't just nod at the right moment. She fills in the story. She tells the officers that Fay had gone out alone that evening, that this had happened before, that she might have had her own plans. She creates a backdrop in which Stefanakis' account starts to sound plausible. The voice of the older sister, in a moment like this, carries more weight than the boyfriend's words. A sister is family. A sister is believed first. At the same time, she does things that will only come to light later. She reaches out to people in her circle and asks them to remember the right sequence of events. According to court materials, she instructs at least one person on exactly what to tell the police if they are questioned. This will later be qualified as pressuring a witness. Fay's mother suspects nothing at this stage. She is in shock over her younger daughter's condition. The older one is right there, calm, organized. To imagine that the older sister is covering for the person responsible is impossible on that first night. Fay herself lies in intensive care, unable to refute a single word. For several weeks, this version becomes the official picture of events, and this same picture nearly closes the case before it has even truly begun. Fay is transferred from the private clinic to a state hospital. The diagnosis is grim, damage to the brain and related systems. Her condition is stable but severe. The prognosis is cautious. Her mother barely leaves the intensive care unit. She sleeps in the hallway, eats whatever acquaintances bring her, loses weight. She has one goal, to be there the moment her daughter opens her eyes. It does not happen on the first day, or the 10th, or the 20th. Outside, a different kind of life is running its course. Maria Elena behaves the way confused relatives behave. She shows up at the hospital, talks with the doctors, answers calls from mutual friends. In those conversations, she keeps her version steady, without a slip. No one in her circle allows themselves to doubt her. Stefanakis hovers nearby in the first few days, pretending to share in the grief, then gradually disappears. His behavior during those weeks will later be added to the case file, too. In their reports, the doctors note an important detail. The pattern of injuries on this young patient does not match either a fall or a car collision. The damage is distributed in the way it usually is when actions are deliberately directed at a person. That phrasing makes it into the chart and from there into the investigation. The officers who initially accepted the accidental version start to recheck the story. Requests go to the first clinic where Fay was brought in. Staff there give statements that don't match what they were told the first night. On April 30th, 2013, exactly 25 days later, Fay dies without regaining consciousness. For her mother, this is not one loss, but two. The first is the death of her younger daughter. The second is the slow approaching realization that another story has been growing around that death for some time now. A story in which her older daughter is not saying what really happened. After Fay's death, forensic experts gain full access to all medical materials. The medical examiner issues a detailed report, and that report becomes the turning point of the entire case. The document states that the injuries were inflicted sequentially, deliberately, and with considerable force. The expert uses a phrase that Greek media will later quote at length. He describes the impacts as delivered skillfully and intentionally. This was not a fall, not a car collision, not a coincidence. These were the actions of someone who knew what he was doing. The conclusion strikes down both versions at once. The bumper story is gone. The tale about the young woman by the side of the road goes with it. No road incident can explain injuries like this. Investigators go back to square one and review Fay's entire social circle over the last few weeks. At the center of that circle stands the same person who was there from the beginning. Her boyfriend, the one who brought her to the clinic, the one who kept changing his story. On May 8, 2013, Stefanakis walks into a police station and turns himself in. The decision is most likely tactical. His lawyers already see where the forensic findings are heading and understand that it is better to arrive first. At the station, for the first time, he admits to an argument and to physical contact. But he adds a detail on which his entire defense will rest from now on. He claims that Fay struck him first and that he only defended himself in the heat of an argument. Every court that follows will pick that line apart. The attorneys for the family point out the mismatch. A reaction in the heat of the moment leaves one or two contact points, not a series of precise impacts to a single area. And the fact that, after what happened, he spent hours building an alibi instead of calling an ambulance fits very poorly with the image of a man defending himself in panic. The story cracks before the case even reaches a courtroom. While they're building their case against Stefanakis, investigators also dig hard into the older sister's statements. At first glance, her account sounds logical, but under detailed scrutiny, inconsistencies appear. Mary Elena changes small details several times. Where Fay was that evening, what time she left the house, who she might have called. Witnesses she had previously coached get tangled up in the timeline. One says one thing, another says something else, a third doesn't remember. The breakthrough comes through a friend in her inner circle. Under questioning, the friend admits that she was asked to confirm a particular version of the evening of April 5th. In other words, not to recount what she saw, but to repeat a script handed to her in advance. From a criminal law standpoint, this is no longer just unreliable testimony. This is pressuring a witness and attempting to manufacture false evidence. The investigation qualifies it as perjury and harboring an offender. Then the technical data enters the case. Phone records and message logs between Mary Elena and Stefanakis in the days before and just after April 5th. Their volume, timing, and length do not match the behavior of a shocked relative who only just learned about a tragedy. This is the correspondence of two people coordinating shared actions. Investigators reach the key conclusion. The older sister knew the real circumstances from the first hours and was deliberately concealing them. Mary Elena is formally charged. The case file describes her with a heavy phrase, moral accomplice to what happened. That means she is not considered the person who carried out the act, but legally and ethically, she is recognized as a party to the cover-up. For Fay's mother, this becomes a separate blow, comparable to the loss itself. She has to accept that her older daughter chose the side of the man responsible, not the side of her sister. First during the events, then afterward, when the younger one lay in intensive care and couldn't even speak to defend herself. The case goes to a mixed jury court of first instance. The panel is small, the hearings are public, and the Greek press is already locked in on it. From the very first sessions, one thing is clear. This is not a story about a road accident. It is a story about a love triangle, severe injury, and systematic concealment. The prosecution insists that the act was intentional. The defense asks for mitigating circumstances: young age, no prior serious record, an emotional outburst, sincere remorse. The prosecutor walks through the evidence in detail. The experts' findings on the nature of the impacts, the defendant's behavior after the events, the delay in calling for help, the invented stories, the coordinated lie with the victim's sister. Each of these points pushes the case out of the heated argument category and into the category of deliberate action. The court rules that what happened was an intentional taking of a life. Stefanakis receives the maximum penalty under Greek law at that time, life imprisonment. The same proceedings address the role of the older sister. Here, the ruling is less severe. Mary Elena is sentenced to 5 years of suspended imprisonment, with an obligation to regularly report to her local police station. She is found guilty on 2 counts, perjury and harboring an offender. She receives no actual prison time. The decision sparks immediate controversy, both in the courtroom and among legal commentators. Fay's mother attends every single session. Journalists remember her as a woman of few words, but firm. During one of the breaks, she tells reporters that she would have wanted her older daughter to spend at least 1 day behind bars, not out of revenge, so that she would have to acknowledge out loud. What she did was real complicity, not the help of a confused relative. That never happens, not then and not later. Mary Elena walks out of the courtroom that same day. From that point on, she will never receive a real prison sentence at any instance. The case will continue, but without her as a defendant. A few months later, the verdict is challenged. The convicted man's lawyers file an appeal, and the case moves up to the second level. There, the situation takes a turn the victim's family does not expect. At one of the hearings, Stefanakis is given the floor. He stands up and says briefly, "I have repented. I am ashamed." No additional evidence, no letters, no compensation, no attempt to reach out to Fay's mother. Just those few sentences in the courtroom. The appellate panel accepts the argument. It is recognized that sincere remorse qualifies as a mitigating circumstance. On that basis, the life sentence is replaced with 20 years of imprisonment. Legally, these are different worlds. In Greece, a 20-year sentence is one under which, after a certain period, benefits and parole become possible. A life sentence implies a different regime of oversight. For the mother and the lawyers representing the victim, this decision comes as a shock. As she leaves the courthouse, journalists film her. She says briefly, "Remorse in words after what happened is not remorse. It is another lie." Greek media open a new round of debate over the case. Lawyers argue over whether a single sentence in a courtroom can outweigh everything the convicted man did before it. The prosecution immediately announces that it will seek to overturn the appellate ruling. Their logic is the same. A confession is worth exactly as much as the actions behind it, and there were no actions. The case begins to be prepared for submission to the Greek Supreme Court, the highest instance, which can examine whether any legal errors were made. The family understands that another round of hearings lies ahead, another wave of publicity, another long stretch of waiting. But at this moment, there is no other way to obtain a just sentence, and Fay's mother decides to go all the way. The highest court in Greece, known as Areos Pagos, the country's Supreme Court of Cassation, begins to study the case. At this level, the factual circumstances are not re-examined. What is reviewed is whether the law was correctly applied. The central question goes like this: did the appellate court have sufficient grounds to recognize sincere remorse as a mitigating factor? And behind that legal formality lies a deeply human issue. Was there ever a moment when the convicted man actually tried to make things right? The judges examine the entire factual record. Their attention settles on one key episode. In the hours after the events, Stephanakis did not call an ambulance. He drove Fay to the clinic himself and used those hours to buy time for inventing a false version. Those hours are critical to survival chances with a traumatic brain injury. Instead of help, he chose an alibi. The judges also weigh how tightly he held on to that lie through all the weeks before the forensic report, until the medical findings finally stopped him. On the basis of these facts, the Supreme Court reaches its conclusion. Behind the convicted man's words in the courtroom, there is not a single matching action. The appellate ruling is overturned. The mitigating circumstance of sincere remorse is declared unfounded. The case is sent back to the appellate level for a new review, with the instruction that the defendant's conduct must be considered as a whole, not just his words in court. For Fay's family, this is the first major legal victory in all the years since the tragedy. But it also means another round of hearings and another wave of publicity. By this point, the mother looks very different. Her health is no longer what it was at the start of the road. And yet, she pulls herself together again, finds the strength again. She goes back into the courtroom, and she sits in the front row again. The new review takes place in the Mixed Jury Appellate Court of Athens. The panel examines the medical findings, the correspondence between the defendant and the victim's sister, and the timeline of the first night in detail. Doctors, experts, and witnesses from the inner circle take the stand. The room is full. Greek media call this process the return of the case to its starting point. The prosecutor demands life imprisonment without any mitigating circumstances. The argument is built methodically: the defendant's behavior in the hours after the tragedy, the coordinated lie, the months-long maintenance of a false version, the absence of any real steps toward helping the victim's family. The defense tries the remorse angle again, appeals to the defendant's young age at the time, talks about the complex emotional context of the triangle. But the foundation of those arguments has already been undercut by the Supreme Court's ruling. On June 22, 2020, the court hands down its decision. Stephanakis is returned to life imprisonment. The ruling is unanimous. Every member of the panel agrees. All mitigating circumstances are rejected outright, including the very formula of sincere remorse that had carried the previous appellate verdict. This decision effectively closes the main factual dispute in the case. The mother listens to the verdict standing up. 7 years of trials, expert reviews, and appeals, and the ruling returns to the point it started at in the first instance. The injuries were no accident. The roadside story was held together by collusion, and the behavior after that night had nothing to do with remorse. As she leaves the courtroom, the mother looks a little different than she has in years. Not joyful, there is nothing to be joyful about, but steadier. There is no longer a new appeal on the horizon for her to fight back against, and yet she understands. A final verdict is not the same as the end of the story. Her daughter is not coming back. Her older daughter still lives an ordinary life, and there will be no actual prison time for her role in the cover-up. And ahead of them lies one more turn that none of them sees coming. The Greek legal system is built in such a way that life imprisonment does not always mean until the end of life, in the literal sense. After serving a certain portion of the sentence, the convict gains the right to file a petition for parole. It is not an automatic procedure. Conduct in detention, character references, the absence of rule violations, the existence of a place to live and work on the outside, all of it is taken into account. Stephanakis goes through this path. His lawyers file petitions, gather references, and secure positive recommendations. Inside the system, he gradually stops being a high-profile case and becomes one of many convicts moving through a standard procedure. According to available reports, in the early 2020s, he is granted a positive decision on parole. The conditions involve supervision, regular check-ins, and certain restrictions. The actual control regime, however, turns out to be noticeably softer than what the word life sentence implies. The place he returns to is the same seaside suburb, the same Nea Makri where Fay lived and died. Neighbors recognize him quickly and start talking about it to local journalists. Some see him at the supermarket. Some see him near the beach. For the victim's family, this becomes a fresh wound. The mother, no longer a young woman, learns that the man who caused her younger daughter's death is walking the same streets Fay used to walk. Greek outlets revisit the 12-year-old case. New articles appear, new interviews with lawyers, new commentary about the gaps in the system. A question rises: how reasonable is it to release a man whose life sentence held for so long and was confirmed by a unanimous court ruling? The articles offer no answer, only a heavy fact. A man found guilty of intentionally taking a life is once again living in the same place where he committed his crime. The ending comes without a courtroom, without a verdict, and without lawyers. On July 24, 2025, in the morning, the body of a man is found in Nea Makri. It turns out to be 37-year-old Vangelis Stephanakis, the same man whose name had become synonymous with the Blaha case. Local services arrive on the scene, conduct an initial examination, and question those who had seen him in recent days. According to preliminary information, the cause is identified as a heart attack. No signs of foul play, no marks of a struggle, no third parties, no external injuries. The prosecutor's office does not open a separate investigation. The situation is classified as death by natural causes. That conclusion will later be confirmed by more detailed medical checks. That is how the life ends of the man whose life sentence had been held together across 2 rounds of trials and 1 Supreme Court ruling. He dies a free man, on parole, just a few streets from the place where, more than 12 years earlier, he had caused the death of a 23-year-old woman. For 12 years, the case had occupied courts, newspapers, legal analysts, and public discussion. And it ended not with a sentence served to its conclusion. It ended with a short notice of death. Greek outlets release detailed retrospectives. The headlines all carry the same idea. The Blaha case is closed, but not by justice. For Fay's mother, the news cuts both ways. On one hand, the man who caused her daughter's death no longer exists. On the other, she never got to put the period at the end of the sentence herself, biology did. The older daughter, Mary Elena, has by this point lived an ordinary life for several years. Her suspended sentence ended long ago, and there are no new charges against her. The third participant in that night in 2013 never served a single real day behind bars, and now she never will. In the first days after the news of Stephanakis' death, Greek journalists once again ask Fay's mother for an interview. They will not hear a long, detailed speech. She speaks briefly. She will never have one daughter back, and she barely speaks to the other. That short sentence describes the real cost of that April night in 2013 more precisely than any verdict ever could. The case took more than just the younger daughter. It tore apart the very fabric of a family in which 3 women once lived. Legally, the Blaha case has become, for Greek attorneys, a classic example of how the Supreme Court can return a verdict to the facts rather than to elegant words in a courtroom. Law students are shown how a single sentence, "I have repented, I am ashamed," can briefly change a legal classification, and how the highest court can roll it back. Lawyers argue over whether an accomplice to a lie in cases like this should receive only a suspended sentence, or whether such actions demand real imprisonment. Greek legal practice still has no clear answer. In public memory, the case has remained tagged as the Nia-Makri triangle. Psychologists analyze the older sister's behavior through the lens of fear, jealousy, and emotional dependence. Mary Elena herself has never given a full public explanation of what happened. She avoids journalists, never mentions the case on social media, and when stopped in passing, she answers briefly that everything has already been said in court, and there it rests. The story of Fay Blaha has long moved past the boundaries of a love triangle and a court chronicle. It is a conversation about what happens when the person closest to you chooses the side of the offender, not the victim, when blood becomes part of the lie instead of part of the defense, and where the line lies between "I protected her" and "I gave her up." That line is not one any court will draw for us. Each person draws it themselves and then lives with that choice for the rest of their life.